Wrath, Aeon of Ruin, is a generic name for a boomer shooter, but it's a fitting name. It knows what it wants to be, and it does that extremely well. This game came out in early access roughly 4 years or so ago, with only a hub world and a couple of levels. That was pushed to 5 levels in that hub world, but now, the full release is here. 3 hub worlds, 5 levels each, 15 levels total, and 3 bosses. These are not short levels either. Some of them took me 40 minutes to an hour to beat. It suffice to say that there is now more than enough content to make anyone happy with their purchase. I'm stating this right away because that was the biggest problem I saw with the early access build. No longer an issue. Hey, Jarek here, and I need to disclose right away that this video is sponsored by the publisher of this game, Fulcrum Publishing. That said, they've sponsored many of my videos in the past, and I always love taking their sponsors, because they're really hands-off. They don't give me a script or a bunch of bullet points or things I need to cover. They just say, hey, new game's coming out, here's a key, we'll pay you, do you want to play it? Of course I say, hell yes, because dragons like gold, but also because I have full freedom to say whether I like the game or not. In fact, the last video they sponsored was pretty negative about the game, and I was worried about that, but literally in the next email reply, they said, hey, we got a new game coming out. This is still the same thread of the last review. I have a huge amount of respect for Fulcrum Publishing. Very few publishers actually do this. So a huge thanks to Fulcrum Publishing. It's a situation where kind of everyone wins. They get exposure, I get money to pay bills and rent, because seriously, this does pay my bills and rent, and YouTube income is unreliable, especially right now. And you guys get a bunch of new content that you usually wouldn't be able to see. Okay, enough rambling, let's talk about this game. You are a lost soul, adrift the ageless sea. You're immediately greeted by this figure in white. This is the Shepherd of Wayward Souls. There's no voice acting in this game, there's no speaking, there's no cutscenes, but this isn't to say it didn't grab my attention. Yeah, I think it's a lot more fitting for a character like this rather than voice acting. He gives you the task of hunting down the remaining guardians, the last of these old ancient worlds. And that's pretty much it, as far as the protagonist's main motivation to do anything in the game. With that said, that's not what grabbed my attention here. What grabbed my attention was the atmospheric storytelling. You're thrown into a hub world that's completely abandoned. There was a civilization here, but the feeling is foreboding, as if something went wrong, whether from their own fault or something attacking them. For a game that's basically trying to focus most of its attention on being a classic boomer shooter that feels like Quake, I didn't expect this level of detail to be in the game, but it does an exceptionally good job. There's so much attention to detail, and these worlds constantly change throughout the game. I'm gonna make a super weird comparison here. This is Spyro with guns. I'm serious, you have a detailed hub world that you want to explore that has secrets all around it. There's 5 different portals on this hub world that will lead you to full-on levels. These levels themselves are unique from the hub world, look different, and all look pretty interesting. You need to collect relics, kill enemies, and find secrets. You can even press tab and it tells you the stats. This is the same format as Spyro, and I'm really down with this. I think this format works really well for retro shooters. It also gives you a sort of natural place to start and stop playing the game. It helps avoid burnout because you know what the end goal is. You know after you beat 5 levels there's going to be a boss, then you move to the next hub world. It also really helps that the worlds themselves just look really pretty. Because what I've left out is that this is made with Quake 1 tech. Even if this wasn't made with Quake 1 tech, it would still look good, but knowing that puts it to another level. The music is oddly something I really like and something I dislike. You see, when things are calm and quiet and you're exploring, it really gets across this vibe of exploring an ancient civilization that has been lost to time. It fits incredibly well. But when the combat picks up, it just doesn't have the energy to fit what's going on. Now, I'm not saying all of this needs to be Doom. It doesn't need to have heavy metal blaring all the time, but it also doesn't seem to change. It's still quiet, not noticeable. It just doesn't fit what's happening. It feels like one half of the soundtrack was made and then the other half simply wasn't. But that's a very small complaint for an extremely polished game. Never had any crashes, the frame rate was good, controls were fine, aiming was fine, Really good release. From here we move on to the gameplay. You remember how I said this game runs on Quake 1 tech? Well, you can tell right away. It feels like Quake in its movement and shooting. That isn't to say it's a Quake 1 clone and it's just a remake of Quake and there's no point for it existing, because that's also not true. There's quite a bit of differences between the two games. The most obvious difference is the map design. I mentioned there's 3 different hub worlds and each one of them look different. The first one takes place in a marsh, the second one takes place in a desert, and the third one takes place in death. Yes, blood. I'm not going to spoil too much for the third hub world, nor the levels of the third hub world. I want to keep something for you guys to play. What I will say is that these levels during the third hub world are this game at its peak. You have all of the weapons, the map design is getting more intricate, you get all of the enemies to fight, it's a lot of fun. Also, it just looks really good. I mean, look at this. Okay, so what do I really mean by the map design being different? Well, instead of your typical linear first-person shooter affair, these maps are really big. That might have made you panic because it seems like it's really easy to get lost, but no. It kind of in a way reminds me of Proteus, where the maps are big but funnel you the correct direction, so you always seem to be pointed towards that door you need to open. This is a long game, and I never once found myself wandering around having no idea where to go. These maps are big, have lots of enemies, and have lots of secrets that I will inevitably not find because I am terrible at finding secrets. Okay, more accurately, I'm too busy shooting enemies to even think about looking for secrets and usually don't care enough. I look in a room for about 5 seconds, then immediately say, alright, new enemies to shoot, and keep going. Anyway, even within this game, the map design changes. Some levels do that classic thing where you load into this main big room, and there are 3 different directions to go. You effectively have to turn on power between those 3 different directions. It's almost as if they made a hub world within a hub world. And again, I love it when games do this because it lets me split a level up into multiple different sections, so it doesn't feel like the level should have ended 40 minutes ago. It's a tried and true method. That doesn't mean you can't fail. Black Mesa Interloper is a really good example, but when it works really well. So these levels vary between a more Proteus style to another style that will put a roadblock in front of you and then loop you around to eventually open it, to having a hub world within a hub world. I haven't even talked about any of the guns or the enemies, and I've already shown you a bunch of variety. It's great. Speaking of enemies, one of my favorite things about retro shooters is that enemies can have incredibly interesting designs aesthetically. For a while, shooters wanted to be more and more realistic, and that kind of locked us into just generic dude bros, and that was it. So seeing whatever the hell this is a really nice change of pace. The actual enemy usefulness kind of fills the normal niche you would expect. Some shoot at you at range, some rush right at you, some do other things. But there are enemies that have gimmicks, like an invisible enemy that will pop up in front of you. But what I noticed right away is that enemy placement is really good in this game. It makes even the more boring run straight at you style enemies fun to fight, or at least memorable. But none of this means anything if the gameplay doesn't feel good. Thankfully, they nailed the gameplay. I mean, what would you expect with them basing this on Quake 1 so much? The first weapon you get is a blade mounted to the back of your wrist. Its primary attack isn't too useful, you just slash at the enemy, it's pretty weak, but you'll mainly be using its split function, which gives you momentum and boosts you forward, doing a decent amount of damage. More importantly, this is a utility option. This game is an old-fashioned retro shooter, meaning you don't have boosts and all these other advanced things you would expect to see in Ultra Kill or Doom Eternal. So this is where you're getting that speed and momentum. You'll be using it a lot during platforming and even while you're fighting to get out of combat. The first gun you get is this tri-barreled shotgun revolver thing. At first I thought it just had 3 cylinders that rotated, and it does, but it fires shotgun slugs. Primary fire is an accurate single shot, but its split function fires all 3 cylinders at once, which is why I call it a 3-barreled revolver. It's weird, but it's also useful. I use this thing right up to the end of the game. But almost right away, you come across a double-barreled shotgun. Yeah, you know a game is good when you come across a super shotgun within the first 30 minutes. And this does exactly what you would expect. It sounds like God slamming his car door, does a ton of damage, will probably be your most used weapon in the game. Its split function is also a charge-up shot that fires 2 slugs at the opponents, and this is really good. It's not 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough. The next weapon you get is the Fang Spitter. It's a nail gun. This is just the Quake 1 nail gun. It is a really cool design nonetheless. It's still incredibly deadly, and I used it till the end of the game. I used all of these weapons till the end of the game, no exception. Now this gun's split function used to fire 2 fangs at once and sound really powerful, but they found people weren't using it, I guess. So they changed it. The split function now just gives it a ridiculous rate of fire, and this makes it incredibly deadly. I don't want to sit here and explain every gun in the game. I feel like you need to find some of them and have them be a surprise, so I'll show you one more weapon. It's basically a railgun. The reason I'm showing you this one is because you can more or less do the Doom Eternal thing and swap back and forth between the super shotgun and the ballista. But in this case, the railgun. The important thing to keep in mind though is that these weapons do have cooldowns, and you can visibly see the cooldown on the railgun. This cooldown is not skipped if you swap weapons. Same with the shotgun. You won't have to complete the animation when you pull the weapon back out, but it will not fire until that animation would have completed. So while weapon swapping is really viable, and I would highly recommend you do it, there are checks and balances in place to make sure it's not too powerful. It's still insanely fun to swap back and forth between weapons and do as much DPS as possible though. Like I said, I don't want to spoil all the weapons in the game for you. What I will say is that the last weapon, which you would expect to be a BFG, is kind of a BFG, but not. It's an interesting weapon. I had a lot of fun with it. And now let's talk about the bosses. Like I said, I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm only going to show you the first boss. The second boss I found to be a lot easier than the first one, oddly enough, but none of them I found to be incredibly difficult. I did think these bosses were good though. They all had their own gimmick, yet you still, in the end of the day, just shot them until they died. For example, throughout the levels in the first hub world, you found these gates that would allow you to fly for a short amount of time. Again, Spyro, anyone? So you already know what these gates do. When you see one right in front of the first boss, you know you have to use it. Ultimately, this is mainly useful to get to the top floor because trying to fight back from the bottom floor with all these projectiles is a really difficult thing. It's in your best interest to not be on the bottom floor, so you better use this gate. Other than that, the boss has an interesting design. You dodge its attacks and you shoot back until it dies. It's not groundbreaking, it's not revolutionary, but it does have a nice little twist on a boss that otherwise would have been seen as somewhat boring. The other bosses do something similar, but again, I don't want to spoil them for you. What I will say is that I had fun with them. I actually liked these bosses. Bosses are the, well, bosses of the hub world. Once you beat all 5 levels, that's your final challenge until you move on. Something about it stimulates that part of my brain that gives me pleasure. I don't know what it is. Everyone's gonna clip that out of context. So yeah, that's Wrath Aeon of Ruin. If you can't tell, this is a really good game for what it wants to be. If you like the more Quake style of boomer shooter, you're going to love this game. But if you prefer the new style like Doom Eternal or Ultra Kill, you may get a little bit bored. Or if you just never really cared for Quake to begin with, then this game was obviously not made for you. What I'm trying to say is that if you like boomer shooters, this is absolutely a game you should play. Huge thanks goes to Fulcrum for sponsoring this video and throwing this game at me. I had a lot of fun while playing it. Check the link down below in the video information and pinned comment if you want to buy this game for yourself, and I'll see you guys next video. Huge thank you to my YouTube members. Tier 2 and up get to see early viewing of my videos as soon as they're done. And also just a big thanks to everyone that's subscribed to this channel. I'm trying to reach 250k, so if you're not subbed and you like what you see, consider subscribing. See you guys next time.